Welcome, listeners, to Connect the Dots. I'm Alison Rose Levy, and I'm here with you every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Radio Network. Each week on Connect the Dots, we connect the dots between what's going on in our communities, in our society, and on the planet. And we talk with different authors, experts, journalists, advocates, economists, scientists, filmmakers, and people all across the spectrum about all of the things that are going on so many different levels that affect and impact our lives, our communities, our health, our society, and the ecological balance of planet Earth. I'm originally a reporter on health, the environment, and food policy, so that's kind of the ground nexus, but of course we do also talk a great deal about politics because, these are not problems that people can solve individual by individual. On today's show, I'm delighted to have a returning guest, Branko Marcetic. He's a Jacobin magazine staff writer and the author of a new book, which we'll be discussing today, Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. So Biden will be our theme today, and there certainly is a lot to unpack, both in terms of his history, which Yesterday's Man delves in great depth, giving a really complete portrait of, this individual, as well as the current issues, both in our world and in the campaign, that are relevant to the vote, the Democratic nomination, and the next presidency in 2020. So welcome back, Branko, to Connect the Dots. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, we have a situation. I mean, the one thing about your book, Yesterday's Man, that kept, if there were two words that kind of kept coming up for me as a kind of overframe beyond, the individual policies, they would be opportunistic and, changeable. It seems that in some kind of strange way, Joe Biden presents as one thing, and people have formed an impression of him based on his personality and not really having access to or recalling the kind of information that you have detailed so brilliantly in this book. And so there's a real confusion and lack of clarity about who he is and what he stands for, what he has stood for, and what he has done, and what kind of president he would be if he were to become nominated and be and win the presidential election. There's almost like he has this very public face that people feel they know, but there's just a lot behind that. The singular thing that you mentioned at the beginning of the book, of course, is this personal ambition to be president and just do whatever that might take. Having spent this amount of time looking in depth into his history, just before we get into some of the details, what is your own kind of overview perception about him as a politician and a person?
Yeah, it's as you said. I think that he is most driven by his own ambitions. Many politicians are. I think we can see that in people like Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in this cycle. People who have really organized their entire lives around the goal of becoming a major elected official and even president. And Biden was telling people like his future first in-laws when he first met them in university that he wanted to be president, that he wanted to be senator. This is a long-standing goal of his. He actually said later that he had joined law school because it was, as he saw it, the easiest path forward towards a career in politics. So I think that has always been his guiding light. And the problem is that when your entire career, when everything you do is just a way to ascend up the ladder or to further your own personal ambition, you can end up doing some really terrible things and making some really ugly compromises in order to stay in power and make yourself politically viable. And I think Biden's career is really an example of that.
What would you consider, we can talk about several of what you, having surveyed his entire political career, view as, his kind of, his ugliest compromises. I mean, we could cover a couple of those. I mean, what would you start with in looking, in reminding us and looking into that?
Probably the most far-reaching is his actions in criminal justice. Obviously, as we are fully aware, at this point, Joe Biden was one of the leading architects of the system of mass incarceration that exists in the United States, not just because of the 1994 crime bill, which actually in the long run was not really that impactful. The ball had really started rolling before then. It was really the stuff he did in the 1980s and some other stuff he did in the 90s that was bigger. Biden passed a criminal code with the help of Strom Thurmond that instituted these harsh mandatory minimums that really exploded the population, the prison population. He eliminated parole. He established the crack and powder cocaine sentencing disparity, put a lot of money into policing, into law enforcement, expanded civil forfeiture, which is the practice of law enforcement basically being able to just accuse you of committing a crime and stealing your things. All of this stuff, as well as some general anti-drug, really tough and drug stuff, helped balloon that prison population, lead to this very racist system of mass incarceration. And, Biden was aware of the perils of this because he had criticized Nixon, for example. He had said that Nixon wanting greater powers to go after organized crime, to survey organized crime, he said that was could imperil people's civil liberties. He criticized Reagan for having tough on crime policies. He said, it costs more to send your son or daughter to Yale or Harvard than it does to keep someone in prison for a year, and he advocated for less punitive policies. Of course, again, this changed as the 80s went on, and I think it's a reflection of the fact that Biden saw this as either a vulnerability for himself, living in Delaware, which had a very racist history, and also was very much dominated by the kind of conservative suburbanite crowd that I think went for Reagan and had gone for Nixon. But also he saw it as a way to shore up, to get political points at a time when this stuff was really salient. And he would through the 80s and the 90s, even as statistics showed that drug use was going down, that crime was going down, Biden would inflame the situation and try and stir up panic in order to justify, pushing for more tough on crime stuff. In the 90s, there was a Justice Department report in the early 90s, and FBI figures that showed crime and violent crime was trending downwards. And he said, don't listen to the statistics. It's much worse than the numbers suggest. There's carnage going on in the streets and so on and so forth. So, I think that's probably one of the worst compromises he's made, really jumping on that tough on crime stuff. I think another one that we could point to is the Iraq War. Biden really pushed the Iraq War throughout the entirety of 2002. And he knew, again, he was well aware of problems with it. He had said, actually, around the same time, we can't just replace a despot with chaos. So he knew that there was potential trouble in this, but he also had to get reelected. And so 2002, he was being challenged by what he felt was a pretty strong challenger. Independent outside analysts said that this was not going to be an interesting race and that he wasn't much of a threat, but Biden obviously felt differently because the guy could out-fundraise him, or at least challenge him in fundraising. And so Biden, went hard to the right on the Iraq War. And, the result is not just thousands of Americans dead, but hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead.
Yeah, that's, and then he's tried to kind of walk back some of this history. He tries to portray himself as, a civil rights activist, and then, of course, that was debunked, and then he tries to say that he was the first person to disagree with, the war after it was passed. Back in those, one might think, given his current cognitive status, which is evident but denied and hence kind of mysterious to some people and sort of a bit evident to others, that maybe he was suffering from memory loss. But is the pattern of changing sides on an issue and misrepresenting what you actually did and where you actually stood something that is recent, or is it a long-standing pattern in his career?
Oh, very much a pattern. Obviously, right now, it is up in the air to some extent. Is Biden, does he genuinely believe what he's saying, even if it's wrong, or is he being dishonest? We can't look into the man's soul or his mind and say for sure, but we can look at the rest of his career and his history, and we can see that he does have a pattern of dishonesty. I give this example in the book in 1978 when he first went for re-election, and Biden was, first endorsed by Howard Jarvis, who was the father of the Proposition 13 in California, this anti-tax measure that's still in the books that they're trying to get rid of now. And he got endorsed by this guy, and Biden released a statement and he said, "I'm delighted, that I've been recognized for trying to keep taxes down and kind of trying to keep government small." And then a few days later, went to an event with a mostly black audience, and he said, that Proposition 13 is terrible, and I have no feelings either way about Howard Jarvis' endorsement. If he wants to endorse me, I can't do anything about it. That's just one thing. There's another. There was a news story that came out during his first Senate campaign, which he said, I'm running on the themes of honesty and integrity. I want to be known as someone who is honest in his political life as well as his public and private life. And in 1972, this campaign worker resigns, and he tells the press that he's Jewish, and he had been asked by Biden to write a Middle East position paper for the campaign, and he decided he didn't want to because he alleges that Biden had said to him, I can't have my own personal views about Israel because those views will be political suicide, namely the idea that Israel needs to give back the land it had taken in the Six-Day War. And Biden says, well, according to the student, he tells him, just write something that does not accurately portray my views, and whatever position I take now, that'll be the position I take and I hold for the rest of my political career. Biden kind of denied this, but not really, because he was saying, he said, well, the guy is lying, but he also said, look, I was just playing devil's advocate, and his campaign said, oh, there were a lot of ideas being thrown around. There was a wide range of discussion. And so, whatever transpired, it is the case that Biden was and has been one of the most ardent and reliable allies of Israel, no matter what it does throughout the years. Not that, of course, Israel has been as kind to Biden back when he was vice president, but that's another story. And so there's this continued pattern of dishonesty. The civil rights stuff people are very familiar with, but that really is shocking to wrap yourself in the civil rights movement. We didn't really lift a finger to do anything to assist it. And his current lies about the Iraq War, that people can debate whether Biden's really confused or what, but the fact is that Biden has said this lie about his record in Iraq numerous times over the course of 2019 and 2020 so far, and it has been fact-checked by numerous outlets repeatedly. CNN has done multiple fact-checks of this. Washington Post has fact-checked it, and a few others. So there's no way that Biden and his campaign are not aware of the fact that this talking point has been very easily debunked. And I think the fact that he keeps doing it keeps insisting that he definitely did oppose the wars as soon as it started, I think is more a reflection of this willingness to say whatever he needs to say in a moment to survive than it actually is about his cognitive state.
Because that's, of course, the signature thing that he kept doing all along, is changing sides, adjusting this. It's like it reminds me of the Groucho Marx quote where he says, I have principles, and if you don't like them, I have others, you know.
Well, there's a great, this happened so much during the 90s. Biden, it flips back and forth between whether he wants to protect Medicare or not. He says that it needs to be cut, then he votes against Bush's budget balancing bill that cuts Medicare. But then he says again, years later, we need to do something about Medicare, then he switches again. And then, of course, once he was finally vice president, he did work to very nearly make huge cuts in Medicare. But even beyond that, in 1985, Biden says, I was going to retire. I was thinking about just leaving the Senate finally. But then this new crop of Republicans came in, this Gingrich generation of Republicans. And man, they got my blood boiling. I can't abandon ship now. Everything they stand for, I'm against. This contract for America, it only benefits the rich. I have to stop this. So I'm running for re-election. And so what does Biden do the next year? He pushes and ultimately votes for welfare reform, one of the key planks of that contract for America that he was just saying had energized him to stay in politics past his planned retirement. And then not only that, but he, 3 years in a row, votes for the balanced budget constitutional amendment, which basically, as Biden himself put it, in fact, Biden very, very well and accurately described what that amendment would have done if it was, in fact, enacted. And he said it would make Herbert Hoover's economic policy a constitutional mandate, which is very true. It would have completely, because it requires the government to deliver a balanced budget every single year, and in some versions even made it prohibitively difficult to raise taxes, so you could only balance it through massive cuts. Think Biden voted for 3 years in a row. Each time it fell between 1 or 2 votes short of actually passing the Senate. If it had been enacted, if that was now in the Constitution, think about what that would do to the U.S. response to the coronavirus now that Biden is saying we have to quote, spend whatever it takes to deal with. The government would have been completely handcuffed because of Biden's vote. And the fact that this was another plank of that contract for America that Biden, supposedly said that was so energizing for him, so outrageous that he had to stay in politics, I think really displays the duplicity that has characterized a lot of his public life.
Right. One of the things that has happened in this whole debate season is that, we'd had a whole menu of candidates. I call them the parade of candidates because basically, from the beginning, having so many candidates and so little speaking time for the people who would turn out to be the principal participants has been some kind of strategy of distraction and diversion, masking as a menu of choices, and many Americans have fallen for that, and liking personalities and not really having the time or, the interest in many cases to really delve further into policies. And so we've seen this phenomenon where when people, candidates discovered that Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and other Sanders proposals were immensely popular, then you have people adopting them and modifying them and using those terms and standing up as if they represent them, when in fact they don't. They're going to change them substantively. It goes all the way from, Buttigieg, who, was openly critical of Medicare for All and openly pushing pharma and healthcare industry talking points, to people who pretend to espouse it, but then quietly undercut it afterward. And, I think Biden is definitely, it's not that he wasn't also critical of it, but he has seemed very willing, one of the ones who's very willing to, take the talking points and act like he owns them. When the history that's described in your book, Yesterday's Man, of what he would actually do in office, would probably be very different. And that's hard for people who are not following closely to really understand and perceive, I fear,
It'll be...
Do you...
Yeah. No, sorry.
Go on, yeah. Yeah, no.
Well, I was just going to say, it'll be interesting to see what happens if he does win a nomination. What happens in the general election? Because I suspect that we will not be hearing that much about things like the public health insurance option and the Green New Deal and all these other policies that Biden has supposedly adopted. I suspect that we will not hear about it at all, but we'll see. Certainly Biden's career does not suggest that it's something that he's taken a lot of interest in.
Right. I mean, having followed him and the constituencies to whom he appeals, which consistently over time seem to be white suburbanites, as well as, thanks to his affiliation with Barack Obama, certain of the older, more conservative black population. Do you find his recent political sweep in the primaries, credible?
Oh, it was extraordinary. Yeah, I did not expect really this book to even get that much attention. It came out just before South Carolina, in stores anyway, and 4 days later, we were looking at a completely different political landscape, which is why one of these things that obviously there are parts of the media and definitely certain interested parties who are trying to push this idea that the primary is over, it's done, and basically to get rid of voter enthusiasm, and I think to sort of just try and wrap things up as quickly as possible, have Biden in the public eye as little as possible. However, I mean, if you look at the way that those things changed just in that 4-day period, I think it shows that this is a very unpredictable, a very volatile race that could flip on a dime. Whether it will is another question, but it has that possibility. Biden's revival in this race was completely out of left field. No one expected it. If I don't know if anyone put money on it. If they did, I'd say that they, were probably pretty pleased with themselves a few days later. But it was not something that anyone expected would or even could happen. And so, as we are watching this race upended by not just the pandemic that that the world is being engulfed in, but also in the way that what that pandemic, not just what it's going to do to the dynamics of the race and what this race becomes about, but also in the actual practical realities of voting in the middle of a pandemic, when it seems like Tuesday is this will be after Tuesday, but all signs point to the fact that the primaries that just happened have been absolute chaos and possibly a public health disaster. The listeners will know more than us at this point, but everything could change and be in flux. So I would say to people that don't assume that things have finished. Biden's resurrection is proof that really anything can happen in this race.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting take on that. Let's go into a bit the question of his mental competency. The chief talking point among moderates is that we don't need to look at it. We're prying. If we do, it's kind of none of our business. It's insulting to aging people. To question his present cognitive capacity. Do you think that it's legitimate and necessary to look at it? If so, why? And also, what do you see, having just spent, this extended period of time researching this book, looking at his past actions, looking, I'm sure, at tons of videos of his speeches and everything like that? I mean, are you, is this a childhood stutter? Are you detecting changes here?
it is safe to say that the Joe Biden of 2020 is a completely different man, at least in terms of his public oratory, his appearance, how he behaves, to the Joe Biden of even 2015. Let alone if we go earlier. Joe Biden, the guy was in the Senate for 36 years. He was later the vice president for 8 years. You don't, now he's running for president as the front runner. You don't have a career like that just by accident. He was a skilled politician. He did a lot of terrible things, made a lot of really terrible choices to stay in power, as we've discussed today. But he is someone who was very good at staying in his seat, at keeping his seat. And one of those reasons, I think, is that he was a very eloquent and charming and quick-witted person for most of his life. Even go back, I would invite people to go and watch the 2012 debate. It's on YouTube, between him and Paul Ryan. Or watch any of the debates that he was in 2007 in the Democratic primary. And then watch the Joe Biden in some of the debates we've seen, some of these public appearances where he's forgotten, Obama's name and other people's names. And you cannot, to me, make the case that this is the same person, that there's nothing has changed. The idea that this is about beating up on old people is, of course, ridiculous. The same people who are saying this, one, have been attacking Sanders as too old for a year. There's no self-awareness here whatsoever. The problem isn't Biden's age. The problem is that he's forgetting, the opening of the Declaration of Independence. He's forgetting names and dates. He said he was running for the Senate. He said in that town hall the other day that if he's elected in November, a year from now, this is just constant. His incoherent answers in debates. So this is nothing about age, and I'll remind people that many of the people making this claim are the same people who have been trying to diagnose Trump from their armchairs for the better part of 4 years, speculating whether he has dementia or something. And listen, anyone who sees Trump in public and listens to him speak, I think it's a totally legitimate thing to ask, is Trump all there cognitively? But in the same way, it's totally, I think, fair to ask about Biden, given what we've seen over the past year. And that is exactly what people were doing for so long. It's only now, as he's become the person most likely to block Sanders from achieving the nomination, it's only now that suddenly the media is saying this is off limits, that you can't say this is ableist. When for the better part of a year, they were, constantly speculating about this. So there was open discussion with cable news that Biden had lost something in the intervening years. Whether this is a stutter, Biden did indeed have a childhood stutter. He overcame it very early on. For his entire career in public life, he has never exhibited signs of a stutter. Because he got over it. In fact, this is one of the reasons why Biden is known as a bit of a windbag in the Senate. Just does these ridiculously long speeches, sometimes at very inopportune times. And one of the reasons is because of the process of getting over the stutter when he was a kid. Left him with this love of speaking. If somebody's suffering from cognitive difficulties, I think things like a stutter, even if they've been gone for decades, can come back. And maybe that's why we're seeing Biden stumbling over his words in debates and everything. But the stumbling over his words is one thing. A stutter does not make you forget who your former boss and apparently best friend, what his name was. A stutter does not make you say that you are running for the United States Senate when you're running for president. A stutter does not make you forget what the opening of the Declaration of Independence is. And so many more examples like this. It wasn't a stutter that caused him to say, we choose truth over facts at one of them. It wasn't a stutter that made him think that he was in Vermont when he was in New Hampshire last year. So that is a very cheap way to try and insulate Biden from criticism by casting his, people pointing the stuff out as a supposedly as a insult to his disability. And I think that people can try and do this in a Democratic primary and try and use that kind of cynical talking point, but in the general election, voters will be able to see with their own eyes what the press is telling them right now is not true, and it will be irrefutable. And to be honest, it'll just, if anything, hurt the standing of the press more, that they are protecting Biden like this, when eventually it will be clear they can't hide him from public view forever.
What would you? I mean, I know this is speculative, but the thing is, what tends to happen in the news cycle is that each thing that's up right now is kind of a new dynamic area of activity, something we're looking at, something we're reporting on. But then there is also the long view. So, which is where is, given if it is dementia, and, I think many people feel it is, there are 47 million people with dementia, which means that, if they have anywhere from 2 to 5, which is actually a very low count of, family members who've been exposed to this, this is not it's not like wondering if somebody has an ulcer when you can't see, what's going on in their stomach or whatever, in their gastric system. So this is not, a problem that's hidden from view that no one is allowed to perceive, and that, this is, a very and ever more familiar problem, health issue that many aging people have. It's, I think, 10% of the population or something. So, all the people who are the next generation down who have seen this or had it occur with a spouse or whatever, have seen this before. And one thing we do know, if it is in fact dementia, and it really should be on, the Biden camp and those seeking, the Democratic Party to actually provide a clean neurocognitive bill of health rather than tell people they're wrong and allow them to guess. I mean, the transparent thing to do would be to have him do a workup and have someone come forth. The reason they don't do that is that the report would not be what they want. So my long view question on all of this is, dementia is progressive. There's an ongoing degeneration. Actually, we may have been seeing that because, if anything, it always seems to be getting slightly worse. There have been things all along, but there seems to be more confusion, et cetera. So, where, supposing that he were elected, or rather, had the most votes to take to the convention to become a nominee, but his mental capacity, had palpably declined, how fit, the question is, it's not how fit, because we can't guess that, but, what if he's not fit at the time of the convention? What if he's not, less mentally cognizant during the campaign epoch? What about when the time for inauguration comes? If he is not following the action and really making decisions, we're putting him up against, someone who's an authoritarian and kind of daddy figure to misguided people, who's blowing it in every direction, but, kind of bluffs his way through it. I mean, what kind of opponent is this, and what state might he be in, and how could he even lead if this were to be the case and it continues, the decline continues?
Well, we're now at a point in U.S. history where we, 3 presidents in the last 40 years have had access to the nuclear stockpile of the United States while going through two presidents while going through aggressive cognitive decline. Obviously, there was Reagan in the 80s. I think Trump right now, we're definitely seeing signs of this. And if Biden became president, he would be the third one. And what does it say about American democracy that back to back you would choose 2 men who are obviously going through health issues to man the most dangerous and powerful military in the entire world? what does it say about the Democratic Party that they, knowing all this, knowing Biden's weaknesses, knowing and seeing the kind of decline he's suffered since 2016, whatever it is, I'm not going to diagnose him, but it's very clear that he has lost a step. What does it say about the Democratic Party that they are willing to take the risk of not just nominating this man to be their standard bearer to go up against Trump, but to potentially put him in the White House in charge of this massive, powerful force? What does it say about their priorities? I think this primary, whatever ends up happening, has been really clarifying, and hopefully will be clarifying to a lot of people, who will see that the Democratic Party, for all its talk that Trump is the new Hitler, that he's a dictator in waiting, all this kind of stuff, all the stuff that we've heard over the past 3 years, that they are appalled at Trump's lack of decency, the way he belittles people, the way that he has taken down the tenor and the kind of esteem of the Oval Office, all this stuff. We're about to see that all of that is a sham. And it's a sham just by the fact that they have so aggressively pushed to get Joe Biden to be the nominee and potential next president, which goes against almost everything that they've been saying for the past 3 years, particularly the idea that Trump is this overwhelming, or that they see Trump rather as an overwhelming threat and something that is uniquely dangerous. I mean, if that were true, would they really put their hopes in a candidate as flawed as Biden, not just in the policy questions, but just as a campaigner? I mean, Biden is in many ways a weaker candidate than Hillary Clinton, who, say what you will about her, but Hillary Clinton could, go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump in debates, and she could appear a lot more competent than him, was just overall better at handling him. Biden's barely been on the campaign trail, and God knows what he's going to look like going up against Trump in debates. That I think will be a very eye-opening experience for a lot of Americans who maybe haven't woken up to the gradual kind of imperial decline that the U.S. is caught up in.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we're down here in the weeds, but looking down the line, as you're describing, that isn't a welcome thing in the offing for any reason. And it actually creates it basically builds a pre-existing dilemma, which is that, 45 or 46% of the population are independents who think that both parties are doing nothing for the American people, who are cynical and don't trust them, who don't participate. Those numbers keep rising, people who just opt out of voter participation because they don't think that they can be heard. And, of course, watching, the Sanders campaign galvanizing millions of people at rallies and all the rest of it in order to kind of bring in this old, worn-out, seen better days and maybe not the greatest guy for the future, sort of drummed into this role has got to be profoundly disillusioning to the populace. And, it's not a contest. I think it's a contest where people who, have been subject to influence by MSNBC or like anybody but Trump, and they kind of know, therefore, what to do or what they think is the right thing to do under the circumstances of voting. But it leaves a lot of other people in a dilemma and browbeating people toward in a bad choice is not really what's called for in this incredibly fragile moment in our societal and global life, really. Let's switch gears and talk about, the current events of the last several weeks that are coming more and more to the fore with the coronavirus and, the handling of it by Donald Trump and, what the contrasting styles of leadership and, really the capacity to address it on an effective and powerful systemic level by, the two Democratic nomination front runners, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, they have obviously done their big addresses on Thursday about COVID-19, and since then they've done a few different events. Sanders has spoken again, did an address the day after, then he did the fireside chat yesterday. Biden did a virtual town hall. I mean, to me, anyone who watched all of these events, if you're thinking right now which candidate is better poised to deal with this crisis, there's no question in my mind that you would think Sanders, because let's look at what happened with Biden. Biden's big Thursday address, which was meant to convey this aura of presidentiality and stability, first of all started with half an hour of dead air as a bunch of workers rushed around trying to figure out why there wasn't sound coming through, why there was some sort of buzzing that was making it impossible to hear anything. And so Biden actually ended up starting late. Then there's town hall the day after, which has been cast by the media in these terms as if Biden had by doing a virtual town hall, by live streaming himself responding to questions, was doing something unprecedented in global history and in the media. That this was something akin to launching the first submarine or something. And the fact that it went badly is just that there was a result of him being the first man to walk on the moon, I guess. And in reality, I mean, people have been doing, and including Sanders himself, have been doing events like this for a very long time. And that town hall is an absolute disaster. If it's up on the campaign's Facebook page. You watch it. It's 4.5 minutes long. They get 2 questions in. Biden at one point wanders off the screen. They had to throw up an image, a campaign logo, to move away from the fact that Biden had just walked away from the camera. He claimed that he had been behind the Endangered Species Act, which is not true. And that's when he said that, the election, when he's elected in November a year from now. In terms of the actual specific policy proposals, Biden spent that Thursday, he mentioned, I have a plan. And then he said, if you want to read the details of that plan, go on joebiden.com and read it. So essentially, I'm not going to lay out what I want to do here. I'm just going to direct you to read this 7,000 word long plan online, and you can figure out whether you like it or not. And when he actually discussed specifics at that address, it was mostly around the issues of testing and around personal behavior. So, don't shake hands, wash your hands, don't hug, that kind of thing. We need to have more mobile and drive-in testing. We need to have testing everywhere. There was a lot of calls to action without being backed up by specific proposals. We need to dig ourselves out of this hole and rebuild the economy. We need to surge our capacity to deal with the crisis. We must. A lot of this kind of stuff without actually explaining what the government would do. His only specifics were about how the government could increase testing, and it was very much about keeping the populace informed so that they knew when to test, when to get treatment, and so on, when to self-quarantine, so on and so forth. Now, you compare it with Sanders, which didn't start at half an hour late, didn't have any technical difficulties monitoring it. Started, in fact, almost as soon as Biden had ended, and Sanders laid out a lot of things that may sound drastic, but I think in this current moment, absolutely necessary, and really the only realistic path forward for dealing with this pandemic. He called for, probably most significantly, a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions and utility shutoffs, basically making the point that people are not going to stay at home if they have to work paycheck to paycheck to be able to afford to be actually able to live in that home. And so we need to take these drastic measures to make sure that they don't have that incentive to leave the house. He talked about the need to, instead of just surging the capacity to deal with it, which is what Biden said, Sanders actually called for retired medical professionals and medical residents and any other medical personnel to be mobilized to deal with the crisis. He talked about the need to obviously do paid leave, which is a long-running demand of his. Biden did as well, but Sanders also made clear, he specified that it's not just ordinary workers, but also tipped workers, gig workers, domestic workers. They had to be included in this paid leave bill or in any paid leave measure. He specified exactly how much money would be given in this paid leave. He talked about emergency lending so that businesses could do construction, whether temporary hospitals or what, and also to produce things like ventilators that are going to be needed and there's shortages of. He talked about the need to construct emergency homeless shelters for obviously homeless populations and also domestic abuse victims, students who are quarantined off campus. So, there were a few other things. Obviously, he mentioned the Medicare for All proposal, of course, which now has increasing resonance. We see that the United States' lack of such a healthcare system, of a universal healthcare system, is making it particularly uniquely vulnerable on the world sphere when it comes to dealing with this pandemic. And there were other proposals, but just that suite of things that I listed off to you right there is something that to me was a very stark contrast to the Biden speech, which really did not go as far as any of this. And I really think in his debate tonight, Sanders is going to, or as we're speaking tonight, and we'll see whether he does by the time this goes to air. But Sanders really should hit on this. He needs to do, I think, what he did in Flint, Michigan in 2016 when he debated Hillary Clinton one-on-one. And he, Clinton, who was this very cautious, conservative Democrat who didn't want to say anything that would offend, potentially Republican or Republican-leaning voters, just could not muster up a bold response to what was happening in Flint, Michigan. And it was Sanders who basically really led the charge. He was saying that the governor should resign. We need to make pay back people and pay for their water bills. They shouldn't be paying for water if it's poisoning them. He talked about the need to get the government in there and to act. He talked about the need to get the CDC to check every man, woman, and child in Flint to sort of give relief and a little bit of encouragement to the local population, the people who were caring about them. So, it took a much more forthright position on what the government had to do to get in, and got a lot of applause from the audience that I think sort of appreciated this much more bold effort than Clinton was willing to give. And I think this is what he has to do. We'll see if he does it, but I think he has to show that, unlike Biden, who is not willing to go as far as even calling for things like a moratorium on evictions, which absolutely needs to happen, that Sanders is the one with the vision and the policies that he's been pushing for years that really fit this exact crisis that the world is in right now.
I mean, the other notable difference is, in the one case, Biden is really modeling how he would act as a leader. He's speaking from the podium of authority, and then he's just telling people what they have to do, and then providing, in talking about the lack of testing and the need for tests, that's a political jab, at Donald Trump, deservedly so, for creating a situation where, we are woefully behind. And, of course, it's not the only area where we're woefully behind. I mean, our whole approach to health care has created a shortage in tests, in treatment, in supplies, in health care personnel, in hospital beds, to just name a few. I mean, we are totally, funding was cut for pandemics. We're just totally unprepared for this, and literally millions of people could die as a result of it. And yet, even in that moment, Biden is still wanting to speak from the voice of authority to give personal instructions about hand washing, which have already been given first by the doctors and then secondly by everybody else on Earth. Everybody is passing along the information about hand washing. As somebody, who's reported on health for over 20 years, we need a lot more. For example, don't touch your face. Does that mean don't put on sunscreen if you're going out? Does it mean don't wash your face? What does it mean after you've brushed your teeth? So these are, kind of off-the-cuff, immediate instructions without there being any kind of full information. So they're really not providing public information, and the public is woefully ignorant about all of this and making an adjustment to a healthcare system which more privileged people might imagine would be there for them, but which won't be there for anyone because of this problem. And then on the other hand, you have Sanders, who has thoroughly thought through the economic supports and the infrastructural, needs that would help make this survivable and less of a kind of panic for all people. And there just couldn't be a sharper contrast. Would that the American public could see it. And, as we're having this conversation, I hope you don't mind my injecting this into our discussion of Yesterday's Man, your wonderful book. But, I was at the DNC 216 convention, and one of the things that was, there were many things that were notable that one perceived there in person that, maybe could not be as easily seen by watching it on TV or whatever. One of them was that, after the anointing of Hillary Clinton and the great celebration with the white balloons of, yay, her moment was finally here, and it was so wonderful from her perspective, bouncing those balloons around. It was occurring within a convention hall that actually also had a shortage. It had a shortage of seats. They were, the DNC in managing it were attempting to get more people, donors, friends, whomever, into the hall than could be seated. I know a neighbor of mine who just, person sitting next to me, never saw her before or anything, was told not to go to the bathroom if she wanted to return to her seat, So there was this sense of desperate, looming people lined up, hoping to get into the hall, and, if you already had a seat, like you couldn't leave, and it was several hours. Then, when the festivities concluded and people left, it was a complete chaos. It was one of the worst crowd management situations that I personally have ever been in. It showed a complete lack of regard, planning. The people, the public officials in their elegant outfits were whisked away in limousines, and the people were literally trapped in a mob scene.
Wait, are we talking about the Democratic Party here? There's no way.
Yes.
I can't imagine. I can't think of any example or incident in the last 1 or 2 months that is sort of an analogy or at least comparable to this whatsoever. No, I mean the Democratic Party is. We just watch these people create absolute chaos in primary election after primary election, not just Iowa, but the long lines that we've seen in Texas and other states, and the mass closing down now of polling stations to deal with this virus. And in fact, they're still going ahead with this, and they're not postponing as several states have done. In what will end up being basically a germ bomb on Tuesday is absolutely staggering. And I think this kind of thing. It's a stark contrast in not just how these two lead, but also their different political visions. Right? Biden, as you say, it's about personal responsibility. It's about putting the onus on the person. It's about saying, implicitly saying, if this goes bad, it's to some extent it's your fault. You were complicit in it. And Sanders is the one who takes a more structural look at this, more structural analysis, and says, well, hold on, there's reasons the way the American economy and society is structured that forces people to make bad decisions and makes things like this worse. And interestingly today, both Biden and Sanders posted op-eds on CNN about the coronavirus, about the pandemic. And I just think the different headlines are just a perfect encapsulation of what these guys believe and what they stand for, and really what kind of leadership you would be getting if one of them became president. So, for example, Joe Biden's op-ed says, "The virus lays bare the shortcomings of the Trump administration." Sanders says, "Coronavirus highlights the flaws in our healthcare and economic systems." Really their messages boil down to their essence. For Biden, just like Hillary Clinton in 2016, this is all about Trump. Trump is a dangerous aberration. Once we get rid of him, everything will go back to normal. Sanders taking the much more realistic and accurate view of the fact that this is a not just about Trump. Of course, Trump has made things worse, but this is also a product of decades of evisceration of public health in the United States and the U.S. safety net that has made it, pushed people into utter precarity and made it a lot more likely that something like this would explode in the way that it has. And by the way, it was Joe Biden who was at the front lines making these cuts to the American safety net, making cuts and undermining the not just the American welfare state, but the public health system, trying to cut Medicare for decades and decades, voting for the balanced budget amendment, all this kind of stuff. So in many ways, as I argue in the book, Biden did, I think, in many ways lead us to Trump, Biden and many Democrats of his generation. But in other ways, they've also led us to this moment where the U.S. is struggling to grapple with this pandemic that looks like it may overwhelm its already threadbare public health services.
Yes, indeed. That's a brilliant summation, and, this has been a wonderful conversation about a very timely book by our guest today, Branko Marcetic. The book is called Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden, and we've been talking about it on this edition of Connect the Dots, and, really gotten into all different places in looking at this, at the moment, Democratic Party front runner and the challenges on multiple levels, and especially with this pandemic, and the opportunity that still is there to try to redirect rather than have buyer's remorse later, for going with this script of this can beat Trump and that's all we need to look at, when clearly it isn't. Thank you so much, Branko, for being with us today again on Connect the Dots. It's always a lively conversation, and this is a terrific book. Listeners, I want to point it out to you. It's a great read. It's published by Verso Books, which authors we often feature here on Connect the Dots. And it's really actually a great tool for anyone participating in campaigning, because you have all in one place, the real history of who this opportunistic person is, and we've also today delved into his current situation. So thank you again, Branko. It's been wonderful to have you here. And thank you, listeners, for being with us today. Please pass the show along to others, share on social media. After today's broadcast, it'll be available at connectthedots.podbean.com. Stay active in this election. And until next week's show, Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm Alison Rose Levy. Be well, keep marching forward, stay safe, and, do all that you can in our current health emergency.